Hello out there, and welcome to the second episode in our hot, sizzling summer special shows here on She Said, She Said. We kicked off the summer with a wonderful, inspiring June visit with Harry Nilsson's charming son, Zach. And looking ahead, in August, we'll be chatting with Rock and Roll Hall of Fame lead guitarist for the Cars, Elliot Easton. We can't wait to dive in to part 2 of his incredible chat with us about how the Beatles inspired his music. And today we have one of our very, very favorite people in the Beatles world who is waiting in the wings to start us up, if you don't mind that subtle Stones reference, perhaps not so subtle, as we all get ready to pack our bags and travel to Chicago for the Fest for Beatles Fans. I am your co-host, Lanea Stagg, the author of the Recipe Records series of rock and roll cookbooks, and I am smiling ear to ear as we begin this very special show.
As am I, girlfriend. Hey, everyone, I'm Lena's sidekick, Jude Southerland Kessler, the author of the John Lennon Series of madly researched and documented narrative histories on the life of John, of course. And if you write about John, you have to also include his mates, the Beatles, as well. So they're all in there. And like Lena, I, too, am counting the days, literally counting the days. I almost couldn't sleep last night thinking about it because we are all going to meet up at the Hyatt Regency O'Hare in Chicago, August 9th through 11th for the Fest for Beatles Fans. To me, it is more than just a convention. It's a party, it's a symposium, it's an experience. And it's hosted twice a year by founders Mark and Carol Lapidos, and of course their 2 very creative daughters, Michelle Joni and Jessica Tilley. And it's not just a way for people to get together and hear Beatles experts lostily speak, and although that's part of it, don't get me wrong, but there's Beatles art displayed, there are Beatles tribute bands. You actually get to rub shoulders with people who knew and walked and talked and lived their lives with the Beatles. It is a family gathering, though, more than anything, more than any of those things. It's a family gathering for thousands of Beatles fans who will be converging at the Hyatt Regency O'Hare to play guitars, sing Beatles songs, just off-the-cuff dance to Beatles music, watch Beatles films, and really to learn so much that weekend from the greatest Beatles biographers and music experts and filmmakers on the planet. And I mean that. I mean, this year all the stops have been pulled out. It's amazing. And our guest today is one of the backbones of this wonderful event.
He is indeed, as well as the perfect eye candy candidate.
Oh, yeah.
Most of you know him as a weekly host of the Wednesday night Sirius XM Beatles channel radio show, The Fab Forum, one of my very favorite shows, where along with his co-hosts Dennis Elsis and Bill Flanagan, they chat with Beatles royalty such as Julian Lennon and Ken Mansfield, and they tackle timely topics such as the release of new Beatles music and documentaries. They also discuss intricacies of Beatles history, and they dive deep into subjects that every devoted fan really wants to hear.
And really, before I got hooked on the Fab Forum, for years I knew him as the man who did it all, does it all at the Fest for Beatles Fans, because for over a decade he has hosted the Beatles trivia contest at the Fest. And he's also facilitated panels of Beatles experts as they debate and discuss various topics, such as, which do you prefer, the Capitol version of Help or the EMI version of Help, and why, and song by song, and really get into the nitty-gritty. But he's also taken part in those panels himself as a well-known and respected Beatles expert. In the last 5 years or so, he has also evolved into the role of the official Fest MC, at the fest, interviewing distinguished primary source guests from all over the world, internationally known authors. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. And I personally am very blessed that he always introduces me when I deliver the early bird presentation on the main stage each fest Sunday morning at 11 a.m. And, I mean, after that, it's a good thing I get to see him then, because after that, he's here, there, and everywhere, working like a dog all day long, interviewing, hosting, fixing whatever needs to be fixed, overseeing, making sure that every single person who comes to the fest has a magical experience. For years, the slogan that Mark and Carol Lapidos have used for the fest is, "A splendid time is guaranteed for all," Little Sergeant Pepper allusion, and the gentleman waiting to speak with you today truly makes it so. So please welcome one of Beatles Fan magazine's most respected writers, one of Sirius XM Beatle Channel's best hosts, and for us, a dear, dear friend through good times and bad times, truly a prince of a guy, Mr. Tom Frangione.
Wow, that was quite a mouthful there, and I'm still getting over the whole eye candy thing. Though, you know, I have also been told I've got the perfect face for radio, so it kind of keeps me grounded. But thank you for that very nice introduction, Lena and Jude. It's an honor to be on a fun podcast, yeah, and obviously with such charming and knowledgeable hosts, that makes it all the more fun. I do a lot of these podcasts, you know, and just weigh in with, you know, what's going on in Beatle history and stuff, and some of them are real loosey-goosey, and some of them are real scholarly, and some of them are fun, and yours has just such a nice blend of it. It keeps it feeling, as you said about the fest, very, very family-focused. You know, here in New York we call it our Beatles Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Everybody comes from all over the place, and they're folks you only see a couple times a year maybe, and but it's a time that we all celebrate and kind of all focus in on that love of that common love of the Beatles.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That band has pulled people together that would not know each other through any other experience. So it is very magical, as Jude said. Absolutely. So, Tom, there are several things that we want to tell the listeners as they consider whether or not to attend the Chicago Fest. It's only a couple of weeks away now, and I know some people in our listening audience are deciding whether to clean out their garage that weekend or watch another rerun of Uncle Bud or something. or they could motor on out to Chicago and have the time of their lives. So to me it's a no-brainer, but let's give those who are on the fence, say, 5 of the most exciting things that they could experience if they dare to leave home and attend the Chicago Fest. And I'm going to make this really tough for you now, because I'm going to ask you to exclude both Mark Lewisohn's presentation and Alan White's talk, because we're going to cover those in a few minutes. So excluding Lewisohn and White, what are the top 5 events coming up at the fest?
Well, you know, one of the things that's always hard for me, Lena, is I go to the fest, and as you say, I'm involved in doing all kinds of events and emceeing things, but there's a lot of time when I'm not doing that, when I'm there going to the fest to enjoy it, as I have really since it started back in the mid-'70s. So I think the list I'm going to give you is going to be kind of a mix of part of it seeming like I'm a shill here for the event, and a couple things that I think might give you a little insight to just how much I still remain through all of this a big fan, not only of the Beatles but of the fest, because Mark and Carol and the team do such a great job. So obviously, as I ask people at one of the events I host, what's your most favorite part of the fest? And boy, if they don't say being right here at the Name That Tune competition, well, they're in big trouble. So that's one of the things that I always do. But now that's not on my top 5. But I guess, the biggest thing isn't so much a thing or an event, but you guys have gone to a lot of fests. I've gone to a lot of fests, and there's always a great buzz when there's something new out. And it could be a new official Beatles album. It could be a new DVD. It could be having one or two Beatles out on the road. It could be anything like that. And as we get to mid-August, we're going to be knocking on the door of the 50th anniversary of Abbey Road. And as we get closer to the 50th anniversary, I just have a real strong feeling we're going to be hearing about some celebrations. A couple of them have been announced already, like the opening of Abbey Road Studios to the public for tours. But I think if they follow suit the way they have the last couple of years with the White Album and Sgt. Pepper, we may be in for a new release. And there's been plenty of buzz on the Internet that I'm not in a position to confirm or deny. But when people start publishing the catalog numbers and stuff, we might be working on a leak here. So I think as we get closer to the middle of August when the fest hits, a lot of that buzz will be happening, and people will already be talking about some of the new Abbey Road excitement that's going to be out there. So that I think is going to be a good underpinning for it. One of the things Jude mentioned in her introduction about the fest, obviously it wouldn't be complete without live music. But one of the things that people should look for beyond Rock and Roll Hall of Fame drummer Alan White, who we're going to talk about in a bit, this year is also the 40th anniversary. I can't believe this, and I told this to the guys in New York. I said, was it 40 years ago that I cut high school to go buy Back to the Egg? Sorry, Ma, if you're listening. But, yeah, it's the 40th anniversary of Back to the Egg, and the Wingmen, as they call themselves, which would be the non-McCartney members of Wings. It'll be Denny Lane, of course, the longtime wingman, along with Steve Holley on drums and Lawrence Juber, the great Lawrence Juber on guitar. The three of them, put together a nice salute, not only to Back to the Egg, but to Wings. So Lawrence goes up there and he pays homage to, Jimmy McCulloch and Henry McCullough, and, plays the leads to My Love, with the band and stuff. So if you're a Paul and Wings fan, that's not to be missed. It's really fantastic. So that's one of my, absolute, go-tos for this upcoming fest. I'm really looking forward to seeing Ken Mansfield, who you mentioned earlier. Ken's book about being on the roof and all his work with the Beatles is so good. And he was a guest, actually, on the Fab Forum right around the 50th anniversary of the Rooftop and told such great stories. And he's a charming guy, and anyone going to the fest should make it a point to take in Ken Mansfield's presentation. And those of you that are still on the fence, as we say, that should be enough to get you to go.
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to not only Jude, and her presentation, which I have the pleasure to introduce every year, which is always fantastic, but some of the real respected names in Beatle authordom out there, Bruce Spicer and Chuck Gunderson, and Ken Womack actually has another new book out, and his books on George Martin were just spectacular. He's a real scholarly guy. He put together that symposium in Monmouth last year on the White Album. Real knowledgeable guy, and his presentations are great. So that whole element, I think, would get its own vote. But here's a fifth one that's kind of a little left of center for me. I mean, for a lot of years as I was building my collection, the fest was about going to the flea market. That's what it was there for, to buy imports and to buy bootlegs. We all have to say bootlegs on this podcast? I guess we are.
I think we can.
Only our eye candy guests can say it.
Oh, I see. So you guys will have to do that. There's a new book out by a guy named Terry Crane about collecting the Beatles and a lot of the stuff that was licensed by NEMS and things. And I didn't collect a lot of that stuff, although admittedly I'm here in my office looking at my binder full of 1964 gum cards. But it has a lot of history of how those things came about, and it's not a price guide. It's a nice, display book with some nice stories about how these things got licensed and, how they got distributed and things. I'm really looking forward to sitting in on that, in terms of, from the collector angle, because as I say, I go there, I wear a lot of hats in addition to and here come the flying quotes, in addition to the work. I like to go in my fan, when I have the fan hat on, I like to go to the flea market and see if there's something cool to pick up. I like to go hear the speakers and find out about their books. I like to go hear the bands and enjoy the music. Of course, it's all part of all the fun. But I think that's 5, right? The Abbey Road Buzz, the Wingmen, the Great Writers, and Ken Mansfield and Terry Crane's book. There's 5. How'd we do?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
I love it. And you may not know this, Tom, but Lanea was actually the official editor for Terry Crane's book and spent a year or half, 2 years working on the book. So we are well acquainted with that and cannot wait to hear Terry speak.
I put that thing on my list.
It's exciting. It's really exciting. I have to tell you my funny Lawrence Juber story when you brought him up. I'm at a book signing on the street in New Hope, Pennsylvania, and this nice-looking man walks up, and I spend 10 minutes going into the John Lennon series and trying to sell him a book and telling him all about John, and he patiently stands there and then says, I'm Lawrence Juber.
Yeah. Every time I see Lawrence, I always tell him he owes me another $3,000. And he says, what for? I say, when I watch you play, I go home, I take my guitar, throw it in the fireplace, and say, it ain't ever going to do me any good.
That's hilarious. That is so funny. Well, okay, confession time. I have to admit, and Mark Lapidos, if you're listening, plug your ears, but Alan White, iconic drummer, was for the first time last year at the New Jersey Fest this past spring. We got to actually hear him speak. And we're not really supposed to leave our booth in the marketplace, but during the hour that Alan was speaking, I played hooky. I left my husband Rand sweetly manning the booth for me, but I went to hear Alan's very heartfelt talk about his years with Yes, and of course this magical time that he spent with John, and I'll let you tell more about that, and also with George. And I was blown away. I mean, Alan gave a fantastic presentation. So for people out there who really don't know Alan, and I guess there's some people out there that don't, give us a scoop and tell us what he'll be talking about.
Well, Alan, of course, is best known as the drummer for Yes, who were recently inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So it's great that Alan has now joined that vaunted club. But back in '69 and into 1970, he was very much in the we'll call it in the Apple Mafia. John spotted him one night in a club, really thought he was terrific, and invited him to come and play at his first full concert outside the Beatles, which we all know is Live Peace in Toronto. So Alan's the drummer on that, but he's also on another live John album, and people go, what? He's not on the One-to-One album. I said, that's right, he's not. But he's actually one of the drummers on that Live at the Lyceum Ballroom disc that was the bonus disc with the City album. So that, he's on 2 John Lennon live albums, which is kind of cool. Not many people can say that. Back to Alan White. Alan also can be seen, if Lennon fans want to kind of get an idea of what he brought to the table, can see Alan pretty prominently featured in the recent television special that was called Above Us Only Sky, the making of the Imagine album, where he's in the band over there at Ascot, and he's there for the creation of all these iconic songs, including Imagine. I mean, one of my favorite scenes in it is when John sits down to show the band that, and everyone's just kind of looking over John's shoulder as he's playing the piano. And I mean, it's got to be like watching someone give birth to something that beautiful. It's just incredible. But he had played with John in the studio. He did that iconic drum part on Instant Karma on the single. So between Instant Karma, the Imagine album, and 2 live concert albums, he's a pretty big presence on the John Lennon early solo records. He also is one of several drummers on the All Things Must Pass album. Of course, Phil Spector would have it no other way than to have half a dozen drummers in there. So he's alongside Jim Gordon and Ringo and people like that, playing drums on several songs on All Things Must Pass. And when George was producing some of the Apple acts, like even the Radha Krishna Temple, who had a pretty big hit in England with a song called Govinda, it was actually Alan on percussion on that song. So he's very much part of that early Apple scene in 69, 70, in that era. And here's, I would be remiss if I didn't do any trivia with you here on the She Said podcast, but you know, he actually was in a band with Denny Laine.
What?
Yeah, you can look it up. They were in a very short-lived band. It was called Balls. Are we allowed to say that on the She Said podcast? I guess.
Sure. We're Maverick. We've gone rogue.
Yeah, there you go. So if you can dig out your old Balls album, you can have Denny Laine and Alan White sign that for you.
That's wild.
Yeah, so pretty cool stuff.
Golly, it's amazing. He is so good, and he starts with Yes, and then he gets into the George and John stuff. And I'm telling people, I don't know what they're thinking if they miss hearing his presentation. There are just no words for how great it is. I was writing notes so fast that my hand was about to fall off. But I've heard this next presentation, and you've heard it, and Lena's heard it, and I just stutter when I start talking about it because the three of us were on hand at Monmouth University when the #1 Beatles guru worldwide, Mr. Mark Lewisohn, blew our minds, absolutely blew our minds with his incredible, intricate, detailed presentation last November, taking us through a year with the Beatles. Well, he is returning to the Fest for Beatles Fans in Chicago for the first time since our special New York City gathering commemorating 1964 on the 50th year anniversary when we all gathered in downtown New York City, and actually Mark Lewisohn was there. He hasn't been back since then, so we are thrilled that he is returning to the Hyatt Regency O'Hare. So any idea what Mr. Lewisohn might be covering? And for those who might not know our venerable Mr. L, give him his propers, Tom, if you don't mind.
Well, Mark is the world's foremost Beatles historian and researcher. His books, whichever corner he approaches it from, whether it's the book that is more of a biography, which is part of a trilogy, the first part of which everyone enjoyed was called Tune In. But he also did those definitive reference books on the Beatles recording sessions. He was privileged to go hear all the session tapes and present them, and log them in book form and describe what's on those tapes. His first Beatles book, the Beatles Live, which chronicled all the club dates right on up through, the stadium years. And then he kind of put those together, the Sessions book and the Live one, and did a thing called the Beatles Chronicle, which is kind of like a diary, a day by day, whether they were recording or filming or vacationing, frankly, or doing or playing in concert or whatever. So his books are on the essential shelf of any Beatles library, of course. But Mark is not. What he's not is a cut and dried, sound like he's reading from a phone book. Oh, and then on the next day they recorded She Loves You. On the next day they did. No, he's a terrific presenter, and the presentation that you're talking about, Jude, that he did at Monmouth about the 1968 White Album era was really fantastic. And it's so expansive that it's actually going to be split over 2 days, Saturday and Sunday. So if you're there, you're definitely going to want to be on hand for that. But Mark also has something cool, and I'm not spilling any beans. This is up on the website and stuff. But he's going to do a little like a flash round of things. You can bring whatever you want: a Beatles book, an album, a photo, a piece of memorabilia, a recording, anything you want. And he's going to work like with a stopwatch, and he'll have 5 minutes that he will tell you all you need to know about it. So if you brought something as common as the Meet the Beatles album, he'd say, that was the one where they lifted songs from With the Beatles and a few songs from singles, and it was made for the American market, and it was the one that went to number one, when they were on the Sullivan Show, and it was the one that, and he'll give you all of the backstory behind whatever it is you bring. So if you ever watch that show on cable where it's the Antique Road Show or something, you show up with some end table and they tell you, oh, this was made in the 1950s and it was it's from this style of architecture or whatever. He's going to basically do that with whatever you feel like bringing. It could be a concert program, it could be a book, it could be a record, it could be a poster, it could be literally anything, and he's going to tell you all you need to know about it in 5 minutes. So, that kind of, crosses over into that interactive side, which is what the fest is about. As you said, it's not just going to sit and be talked to. You're going to be talked with. And there's a big difference. And that really is what makes the fest a lot of fun, is that it's so interactive. It's as interactive as you want it to be.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, you can dance, you can move, you can do, it is the best of the best. I actually have John's forks that he ate from on the plane on the 1964 North American tour, given to me by Betty Birdsell, the stewardess on that plane. So I ought to bring those and just hand him those 2 forks.
If you decipher that John had the chicken and not the fish, then I'll be... Mark I've known Mark, it goes back to the early 80s. We were in England and did one of those first tours, when they opened Abbey Road, and we did a tour around London, and he was our tour guide. And this is before, it kind of exploded into a little cottage industry that it is over there. And he was our tour guide, and I remember him doing one of the cruelest things you could do to a bus full of Beatlemaniacs. We were driving through Soho Square, and he pointed. I said, if you look to your left, that's MPL. That's where Paul's offices are, and everyone's looking. And he said something along the lines of, it's quite possible he's in there today. The whole bus, nearly tilted over, because everybody jammed to the one side of the bus, just by casually saying, yeah, he might be there,
oh, my gosh.
But that's just kind of part of the fun that he brings to something as simple as taking a bus ride around London. But he's a brilliant guy, very, very charming. Obviously, to say knowledgeable doesn't begin to scratch the surface.
Amen. I mean it. Well, for everybody that's listening and going, I don't know if I just want to go here, as great as a speaker could be, I don't know if I just want to go spend my weekend hearing speakers. Let me assure you that the fest is not just this dusty gathering of baby boomers who were, quote-unquote, there for the Beatles. I mean, look, Lanea is a second-gen fan. There are tons of third-gen fans who are thrilled to be at the fest. And it is definitely not a weekend of just sitting and listening to speakers on the stage. There are tons of things that are taking place at the Hyatt Regency O'Hare, August 9th through 11th. So, Tom, give us a sampling of some of those other sorts of totally unique activities that people can experience if they get off their duffs and come out and take part in the weekend.
Sure. If you want to take part in things, there's obviously I host a couple of things there, like the Name That Tune game, which is always fun. The longtime Chicago MC, Wally Podrazik, another dear friend, he hosts the trivia in Chicago. But it's as interactive as you want to be. As I said, there's an art contest. Do you draw? Do you sketch? Do you do crochet and needlepoint? Whatever medium you work in, there's an art contest that anyone can enter. There's a battle of the bands. Do you play the ukulele? Do you play the harmonica? Do you play the guitar? Do you play the piano? You want to go in and bring your band, and there's also a sound-alike if you want to do it solo and just go up there with an acoustic guitar and maybe play Yesterday or play whatever you want. But you can do all that. And Friday night, just kind of as a great icebreaker, there's even this. The band doesn't do necessarily a concert. They do kind of a dance band kind of thing, kind of like think a Night at the Cavern kind of thing. It's all rock and roll. It's they have a dance contest and a dress-up contest. So you want to wear your best Carnaby Street duds, bring it. Okay, that's what it's about. And of course, even those panel discussions and things, no one gets up there and says, and here's how it went, and tell their story and say goodbye. I've never been to one where at the end, or even during the presentation, there wasn't room for questions and answers. So if someone is giving a talk about George Martin and you have a question about George Martin that you want to ask, there are people there that can help you with that. So it's, as I say, it's as much fun as you want to make it. If you're a film buff and just want to watch Beatle concert films all day, well, you can go into one of the rooms and do that too. Yeah. So it really is all about having fun there, and there's so many different ways to do it.
It really is. And I particularly enjoy the panels, and there are a lot of people. I've been on a couple of panels, and the people in the audience, they really, really enjoy coming up and speaking with the people who are on the panels, and you always just meet really interesting people that have a memory to share, or have great questions, and it's such a great interactive experience, and it's just really terrific to hang out with those people. I've taken part in also the Faboratory. I always pronounce it Faboratory, but I've had games and tasting sessions and competitions and so forth, and those have been terrific fun too. We definitely don't want people to think a fest is all about sitting around and just taking notes, because it's not. And speaking of fun events, Tom, tell us about your weekly radio show on Sirius XM's Beatles channel. Give us the background of your co-hosts and tell us some of the best shows that you guys have had in the past year or so. Okay.
Well, as many of your listeners may know, Sirius XM hosts the official Beatles channel. This is, was launched in conjunction with Apple. So Apple and Sirius work very, very closely on this in terms of not only the routine programming and, which songs are in rotation and things like this, but a lot of the specialty program things that go on. So Peter Asher has his show, Chris Carter has his show, and we do it's the only live thing on the channel, which is Wednesday nights, 9 o'clock Eastern, and it's called the Fab Forum, which I was honored to be asked to join. When the channel was announced, they had put this idea of a talk show together with listener calls and guests and things like that, and the two guys that were named to do this were radio legend Dennis Elsis, certainly here on the East Coast. He was the music director at the great WNEW, the very influential WNEW, for over 30 years. Dennis, to say that he is a well-respected figure in radio, New York, and otherwise would be an understatement. Mm-hmm. And a guy named Bill Flanagan. Bill was the editor of Musician magazine for many years and then did a very long tenure over at the MTV and VH1 networks, where he got to produce a lot of shows. A lot of the unplugged shows and Storytellers was kind of his baby. He produced the Ringo Storytellers album, so if you go haul that one out, he's the first voice you hear on that album introducing Ringo. So Bill is a pretty scholarly guy and a great interviewer. I often tell people, I'll point to an inanimate object like a desk and say he could interview that desk and get good information. He's a really good interviewer. Dennis is a great host, and they said, what we think we'd like to complement that with is a Beatles expert, or a Beatles fan, or a Beatle guy. Not just a radio guy, not just a journalist guy, but a Beatle guy. And I was asked to take part in that, and it was an honor to be even considered for it. Much less be invited into audition and ultimately get the green light. So it's been great fun for 3 years. I used the story even as recently as this week. Last week our guest on the show was Bill Wyman from the Rolling Stones. And I said, when else was I going to get to talk to Bill Wyman? When else was that going to happen? And that list, week to week changes, where I say, well, when else was I going to sit down and talk to Giles Martin? When was I going to sit down and talk to James Taylor? When was I going to sit down and talk to Graham Nash? They get us some major names like that as our guests, and there's times we get people who have absolutely zero connection other than they are super fans and maybe well-known people. So we've had actors, actresses, writers, people who are they're just really big fans. They may have never worked with them, may have never met them, but are just super fans. And we work that angle too and say, what is it that makes you a super fan? And hearing their stories, and since they're people that our listeners would know, it resonates really quite well. So it's been great fun to do. In fact, when this podcast is over, I'll be writing tomorrow night's show. We have a couple of great guests coming on. We have Ricky Lee Jones. Now, again, there's a name you don't normally associate with the Beatles, but she's a major artist. has done beautiful Beatle covers. We'll find out why she selected the songs she did and why, as a songwriter, those particular Beatle tracks resonated with her, and that makes for some good radio, or at least we try to make it some good radio. Yeah. And then we invite our listeners to call in. We'll have a topic, so something as simple as, well, there's the new movie that's out yesterday. A lot of people have seen that. A lot of our audience has seen that. And we'll say, that may be one of our calls tomorrow, and we say, call us up at the Fab Forum and tell us, what'd you think of the movie? What was your favorite part? What did you like about it? What'd you think of it? And we'll get a great cross section, and you can hear some people are very proud with their badge of honor and come and say, well, before I tell you about yesterday, let me tell you that I've been a fan since I saw them on the Ed Sullivan Show. We will get that, or we'll get, my mother took me to the movie. My name is Jennifer. I'm 10, and my mother took me to the movie, and I really liked it because I liked the songs or something like that. So we will get a good cross section, and it gives us an idea of who's out there listening and who our audience is, and we try and build the show around that. We'll do some news. There's never a shortage of news. I mean, Paul and Ringo played together last week. There are new Paul albums in the stores. Ringo starts his tour next week. We're going to have Mark Rivera, Ringo's musical director, calling in tomorrow to tell us, how they're preparing to get that on the road. There's never, ever, ever a shortage of Beatle anniversaries. It's always the anniversary of something. So we look at anniversaries and say, boy, wasn't that what a week that was. That I guess this week one of the anniversaries, actually we'll have to talk to Mark about that too, was the last play at Shea when Paul came out with Billy Joel. So when Mark's on the phone, we'll get him to talk about not only what's going to happen next week with Ringo, but what has happened that he was part of with Paul. So we try and give a real nice balanced show, and it's great fun. As I say, talking with some of, literally, it's an overused term, my musical heroes like Graham Nash and Bill Wyman and James Taylor. By the way, did I mention we've had Paul and Ringo, weigh in with a couple of things. It's kind of cool, and you try and keep your cool. The only time I think I ever really lost it is when we were introduced to James Taylor, and Dennis said, and we have with us tonight our Beatles expert, Tom Frangione, and he came away, he went, ooh, the doctor of Beatlology. And I was like, ooh. I said, oh, my God. At that point, it's, when you say, wow, maybe James Taylor listens to the show. That's my God. A cool thing. And we do get calls or emails even during the show from the home office saying, hey, we're listening over here in London, and it sounds great. So we know they're listening too, and it keeps us on our toes, and we're proud to be doing this now for our third year.
Wow,
that is just spectacular. Well, they definitely created the perfect mixture with you three hosts. I have loved every episode that I listened to. You were saying that some of the guests were kind of unlikely guests, but one show I really enjoyed was Matthew Sweet and Susanna Hoffs. I think who it was.
Yeah, they were great.
It was terrific. I was like, I was on a long trip, and I got there, and the show was still going, and I sat in my car for 20 minutes and finished listening to it because I was just hooked. And
Susanna was actually, she did the show solo. She was one of probably our first 10 guests a couple of years ago when the show launched, and then we did one with Matthew and her. But she is an enormous Beatles fan. All the Bangles were, and certainly you can hear not only in the music, but any interview you talk with any that you've ever heard with any of the Bangles, you know just how deeply rooted in the Beatles, not only their sound is, but their whole approach to music, their influence, and what they strive for. So she was just delightful. She was funny and candid and told really interesting stories. And we actually we get to surprise some of our guests. So we were talking, this was actually one of the early thrills we had. Susanna was our guest, and she was talking about how they often would cover Beatles songs in concert. Okay, so a lot of bands do that, but she was telling us why they picked the songs they did. She says, but, we never covered one on record, which I regret. And we said, well, it was almost like that old show, This Is Your Life. We said, well, Susanna, we have dug out a Bangles cover of a Beatles song. And she said, which one? And we reminded her it was a children's pop-up book with, sing-along songs, and the Bangles did a version of Good Day Sunshine. And she went, oh, my God, I forgot that. Holy God. We said, yeah, well, we like to do our homework here at the Fab Forum. So
wow.
That we get to surprise our guests even now and again, and that's fun because they know we've really prepared for them and really have wanted to show the respect that they're all due.
You guys are like the Sirius XM FBI agents.
No, we have a team of great producers. We have one guy named Carl who digs deep with us. He gives me a great run for my money in terms of digging up covers and rarities and things like that. He's really, really well informed and a great producer, as is our producer Adam Saltzman. These guys know their Beatles inside and out. They really do.
Well, kudos to you, Tom, for doing such a fantastic job. That's just terrific. I love Sirius XM so much, specifically the Beatles channel, that I had to get the app for my phone and other devices. This is not like an official commercial, but if somebody wants to take my recommendation, I think they'd be happy.
Well, and like I say, there's such great programming throughout the day on the Beatles channel. The production team over there really does a great job. Some great specialty program offerings, which if you have the app, here's where I go being a shill again, but if you have the app, a lot of things like even our show is on demand. So we go out live on Wednesday nights, and the show repeats on Saturday mornings and Sunday early evening. But if you have the app, it's on demand, and you can hear it whenever you want.
That's great.
Just no phone calls. We're not sitting there waiting, all week. But the phone call bit, the live thing, that's only on Wednesday nights.
Awesome. Well, Tom, I'm sorry to say we are almost out of time. This 40-minute show goes by very quickly, and it feels like
they always do.
Like a hello, goodbye, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but this is the best part. I really want to say thank you for having me on, and when I talk about the Beatles channel or writing for Beatles Fan or any of the stuff, and people say, "Wow, you do a lot of that," and what's your favorite part of it? I always tell them this: it's the friends that you make along the way. Over the 40 years, it's really astounding. I mean, it's staggering how many friends, that you make along the way at things like the Fest and, by sharing all this love for the Beatles.
That's the truth.
Absolutely. Well, are there any future projects that you want to mention that you are working on? Any Beatles Fan magazine articles coming out in the next few months?
Well, we just put out a new issue about, 2-3 weeks ago, which has a cover story on the 30th anniversary of the All-Star Band, which I did a couple of their cover stories because they're about Ringo's All-Star Band, about the history of it and some great moments from over the years. Writing about the All-Star Band invariably breaks down into which years, which players, which songs, but I tried to do something a little bit different and say, well, these were some special shows and here's why. Going down to see Ringo, who's always had that country feel, and see Ringo play at the Ryman. Great. Ringo's 70th birthday here in New York when Paul shows up. Well, that would have to sit somewhere near the top, right?
Oh, yeah.
So things like that. Those are in the brand new issue of Beatles Fan. My guess is the next issue will be, maybe some reporting on the tour. Couple of shows coming up. I'm going to see them here in New York, obviously, but I'm also headed out to L.A. to see what they're billing as the official 30th anniversary, concert for the band. They're wrapping up the tour at the Greek Theater as they did with the first one. So who knows who may show up there?
Whoa! Whoa!
They're billing
I heard that.
they're billing it as an event, so I don't know if that means they're filming it, they're recording it, or if they're doing something a little different. But we make an annual trek out to L.A. to visit some friends. I said, you know what, this year let's do it the weekend of Labor Day to do that. So that's coming up on the horizon.
That is so nice. We'll have to live vicariously through you.
Yeah, there you go.
Thrilling events with us. You're always so busy, and we really are grateful that you took the time out of your day to share and give us the news today. Oh, boy.
It's an honor and a pleasure always to speak with you ladies, always.
Thank you, Tom. We really do appreciate it. We just, like Lanea said, we know that you've got so many irons in the fire and you're going in so many different directions, but thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And, Lanea, we better be taking attendance with you on hand in a couple weeks.
Okay, I might.
All right.
Those 5 things you named, I think that proved my argument that I must go now. So.
All right. Well, good.
Go
figure out the travel plans, the dog sitting, and whatever else has to be figured out. But we'll be looking forward to seeing you there in a couple of weeks.
Terrific.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay,
well,
thanks. Have a great night. Peace and love.
Thank you. Well, show number 3 in our sizzling summer special with the Cars lead guitarist Elliot Easton is just around the corner. And then in September, we're going to be chatting with Jim Birkenstadt, the rock and roll detective, and the author of the bestseller, The Beatle Who Vanished, The Life of Jimmy Nicol. Jim is our featured author at the upcoming free Beatles Festival and Beatles Symposium, Beatles at the Ridge in Walnut Ridge, Arkansas, which is September 20th and 21st. And Jim is going to be giving 2 great presentations at that symposium. And he'll also be showing and narrating the Martin Scorsese documentary, Living in the Material World, on the life of George Harrison. Jim was also the official historian for the film, and he's going to give Beatles at the Ridge attendees some special inside information about what we are going to be watching. It's super cool. So Jim will conclude our lineup of sizzling summer shows here on She Said, She Said, but don't despair. We are booked through December, and our fall programming is just as exciting. So until next time, please go to my website, laneastagg.com, and check out the recipe records series of rock and roll cookbooks, and also visit my dear friend Jude's website at johnlennonseries.com, where you can read sample chapters from her 4 books on the life of John Lennon. And hey, while you're exploring our sites, please sign up for our free newsletters as well. They're full of Beatle photos, information, and fun. So guys, Jude and I really hope to see you August 9th through the 11th at the Fest for Beatles Fans at the Hyatt Regency O'Hare in Chicago. And then let's reconvene in September, the 20th and 21st at Beatles at the Ridge in Walnut Ridge, Arkansas, for 2 days of free Beatles events. And until then, we wish you food for thought, food for the soul, food for the love of rock and roll.
Ta-ra and shine on.